Welcome, folks, to our 8th episode of The Virtual Psychiatrist. With my co-host, Norm Clement, we come to you with this quick episode to talk about legal developments with the practice of medicine and the administrative law. This will impact every physician out there.
Thank you, Dr. Rifai. You have been a rock in your fight against administrative overreach and defending your case where the government accused you of fraud. It seems they were the fraudsters.
Well, Norm, when we think about administrative law, it's easy to get lost in its complexity. But really, it all boils down to this: how much control the president has over agencies and the officials within them. Now, recently, the Department of Justice took a bold position, basically saying that the rules shielding administrative law judges, or ALJs, from being removed easily, well, they're unconstitutional. They're citing concerns about separation of powers. This is all because of the election of President Donald Trump and the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi.
Wait, so you're saying they want to make it easier to fire judges who sit within these agencies?
Exactly. The DOJ's conclusion rests heavily on decisions like the Free Enterprise Fund Veers PCAOB case. That case set the precedent by arguing that bureaucratic layers protecting executive officers from removal violate the president's powers under Article 2 of the Constitution. It's a ripple effect. We're now seeing these principles applied to ALJs.
So this isn't just some technical debate. It seems like it could change how agencies work. How are cases like Axalta Coating Systems or MMJ Biopharma tied into this?
Good question. Take Axalta Coating Systems v. Federal Aviation Administration. There, the DOJ explicitly told the court it wouldn't defend the ALJ's protections under 5 United States Code Section 7521. Same with MMJ Biopharma Cultivation v. Drug Enforcement Administration. They're essentially saying these removal restrictions conflict with what the Constitution allows. Now, the courts have to balance this restructuring against how it impacts procedural fairness.
Okay, but doesn't this rock the system to its core? I mean, ALJs have been this, shield between regular folks and government overreach, right?
That's just it. On one side, we argue that ALJs can't be impartial if they're constantly worried about job security. On the other, we're redefining their accountability because ultimately they're still part of the executive branch. The DOJ's stance shifts the power dynamics significantly, and in some cases, it might even strengthen the president's authority over these judges.
But doesn't this just weaken the idea of checks and balances? If ALJs aren't insulated, if they're just really extensions of the agencies, where's the protection?
True, Norm, and that's what makes this so contentious. Legal thinkers are questioning whether this move endangers the independent judgment of ALJs. Remember, historically, cases like Free Enterprise Fund have emphasized curtailing extreme bureaucracy. But is this overhaul necessary or an overstep? That's where we're at, an inflection point.
Yeah, it's like pulling one thread and watching the whole thing unravel. But it sounds like this fight was set in motion a while back, and we're just seeing the fallout now.
Precisely. These debates are firmly rooted in constitutional inquiries that have been simmering for decades. Decisions from even the mid-20th century touch on the scope of presidential power when it comes to hiring and firing. The DOJ's latest steps They're just a new chapter in this ongoing struggle over administrative control.
Okay, I'm curious now. You've had first-hand battles with administrative practices. So how does all this play into your story with the DEA in particular?
That's a great question, Norm. My case highlights the stakes in these debates. It all began with an undercover operation. A plainclothes officer entered my clinic, posing as a patient. What followed was an attempt to paint my legitimate medical practice as criminal behavior. And yeah, Norm, the DEA wasn't exactly subtle in its
Hold
methods.
up. Are we talking about threats, coercion? What did they do?
There was an administrative subpoena presented under the guise of routine oversight, but its real aim? To fish for evidence they could use in a criminal case against me. And let me be clear, this wasn't just about procedure. It became deeply personal.
Man, that's like bending the rules till they snap. Did they even have real grounds?
None that held up. The irony is, after years of accusations and my own due diligence to clear my name, a jury outright acquitted me. No criminal wrongdoing, completely innocent. But by then, my reputation had been dragged through the mud and the emotional toll. That's something few people understand unless they're in it.
Yeah, and don't get me started on how the media runs with this stuff. It turns everyday professionals into villains overnight. Did you feel that pressure?
Absolutely. Every headline, every piece of hearsay, it amplifies the public's perception. But worse than that, it erodes trust. Patients start questioning you, colleagues keep their distance, and the process itself, it's isolating. There were times I found myself questioning whether the fight was worth it.
But you fought back. Dude, that's powerful right there. What kept you in the ring?
Honestly, the conviction that I hadn't done what they claimed. My practice serves rural communities, places that lack access to mental health care entirely. I couldn't walk away knowing that patients would be left in the lurch because I didn't see this through.
So the DEA goes hard after care providers like you while patients suffer. Makes you wonder what we're prioritizing as a system, right?
It's a question of balance, Norman. The DEA's mission is critical. No one denies the importance of regulation. But when those regulations overstep, when they target doctors offering legitimate care, it's the patients who pay the price. The chilling effect spreads across the industry.
And then we wonder why fewer and fewer docs want to prescribe certain meds or even work in underserved areas. It's a ripple effect. Start with one person like you, and the whole system starts cracking at the edges.
Exactly. And my case reflected a systemic problem. It wasn't just me. The broader issue is the administrative process itself, how opaque it is, how unchecked, and how it leaves practitioners vulnerable without proper due process safeguards.
Man, so this isn't just about you, it's about fixing the whole damn machine. But let me ask, when the dust settled, how did this change your approach to medicine or even your sense of justice?
Well, the case of the DEA administrative judges was unique. They were not balanced. The DEA wins 100% of the time, no justice, no recourse. This is why this is very important. Removing these judges is very important.
Looking back now, do you think this fight reshaped how you view the system or even the role we all play in fixing it?
Exactly, Norm. My case is just the tip of the iceberg. What it really highlights is the systemic issue in administrative oversight, especially in how the DEA handles its regulatory authority over healthcare
And
providers.
by oversight, you mean overreach?
In some ways, yes, regulatory frameworks are necessary. No one disputes that. But when enforcement becomes overly aggressive, not only does it burden professionals like me, it also disrupts patient care. Healthcare providers, especially psychiatrists, can find themselves second guessing every decision.
Right? And it's not just about the docs. The patients are the ones left hanging, especially the vulnerable ones. You're serving rural communities, for crying out loud. Who steps in when the system drives doctors out?
That's the crux of it. Federal scrutiny, when unchecked, can cause a chilling effect. Doctors hesitate to prescribe certain treatments or even avoid high risk areas of practice, which leaves patients without options. In psychiatry and addiction medicine, where trust is already frail, this undermines care entirely.
Yeah, and what gets me is how folks think regulation is black and white. It's either too little or too much, but isn't there, I don't know, a middle ground?
There has to be norm. Reforming these practices requires balance. Agencies like the DEA need mechanisms that hold providers accountable, but also protect their autonomy. Transparency in how these processes happen. That's crucial. Professionals should have safeguards to ensure due process, plain and simple.
Speaking of balance, does this litigation push for real change, or is it just, a band aid while the wound keeps bleeding?
Ongoing litigation is part of the solution. It forces issues into the legal spotlight, challenging unconstitutional practices. Legislative reform can follow, but what's most important is re examining how these systems function day to day. Without accountability, the healthcare system crumbles under mistrust.
Man, it makes you wonder, if these flaws are so glaring, why hasn't it been fixed already? I mean, are folks just looking the other way?
Sometimes it feels that way, but I think it's also about inertia. These frameworks have existed for decades. Changing them, even when constitutional flaws are obvious, takes immense litigation and political will. Raising awareness, creating momentum, that's where it begins.
Well, you're definitely raising awareness. And let's be real, this isn't just about one or two bad cases. This whole conversation makes you think about the fate of the entire medical community.
It should, Norman. These procedures need reform, not to dilute the DEA's mission, but to ensure that its reach doesn't threaten the very professionals tasked with caring for others. And like we've seen in my case, until those reforms happen, these battles will keep repeating.
You know, with everything you've shared about the systemic issues and raising awareness, it makes me think these changes to administrative law judges, they're not just shaking up the DEA, right?
You're spot on, Norm. What's happening isn't limited to the DEA. It sets a precedent that could ripple through other agencies, like the Department of Health and Human Services. Take Medicare exclusion proceedings. Imagine the same shifts affecting how those cases are handled. We're talking about redefining fairness across the board.
Wow. So this could get a lot bigger than most folks realize. But what's the end goal for the government, I mean? Is this about efficiency or is it about control?
That's the underlying question. On paper, it's about aligning with constitutional principles, ensuring the president has clear oversight over executive branch officials. But in practice, Norm, we could see a spiral where vital agencies lose credibility. The reduction in ALJ's authority could weaken their role as impartial adjudicators and ultimately the checks on agency overreach.
And if that happens, if trust erodes, then who pays the price? It's not just docs like you, man. It's the patients at the end of the line.
Exactly. And that's where the real danger lies. If healthcare professionals fear unjust persecution, or worse, if the system prioritizes prosecution over patient care, communities, particularly the underserved, will feel the brunt of it. And once that trust is broken, rebuilding it takes generations.
Yeah, and let's not forget the DEA and other agencies have missions that matter. But when tools get misused, the whole system takes a hit. Sounds like we need more than reform. We need accountability.
Absolutely, Norm. Reform without accountability is just a band aid. Agencies like the DEA need oversight too. Systems that ensure transparency while respecting constitutional limits. It's the only way forward, not just for professionals, but for the integrity of the entire healthcare framework.
Well said, man. I gotta tell you, this conversation has been eye-opening. We started with your story, but really, it's about the bigger picture, fixing a system that just doesn't work for anyone right now.
That's the hope, Norm. It's about creating a system that balances enforcement with fairness, ensuring care providers can do their jobs without fear, and most importantly, protecting the communities we serve. On that note, thanks for holding space for this conversation. It's been incredible.
Right back at you, my friend. And for everyone listening, take this as a reminder. Advocacy doesn't stop here. The fight for justice is one we're all part of. And always remember, you are within the norms. We'll see you next time.